They rise like walls carved by ice. Corridors of stone where oceans cut into the heart of continents. Fjords, immense scars of time, sanctuaries where water and mountain meet in silence. Step closer, and the air carries the salt of forgotten seas and the chill of ancient glaciers. A journey begins in Geiranger, a UNESCO-listed valley where 7 silver ribbons of water plunge side by side, their spray dissolving into the deep. Legends cling to these cliffs, but so does memory. An invitation to follow into Earth's hidden cathedrals. Mist clings to sheer cliffs. A single gull wheels above, its cry echoing against granite that climbs 1,000 meters skyward. In Sognefjord, the longest and deepest fjord at 1,300 meters, tides roll through shadows so dark they seem eternal. At Naeroyfjord, canyon walls narrow into a labyrinth where sunlight barely enters. In Trollfjord, the sea compresses into a blade, mountains leaning so close they almost touch, and above Lysefjord, a stone pulpit hangs over the abyss, a ledge daring the world to look down. But the story of fjords is not Norway's alone. In Patagonia, channels twist through the silence of Aysen. While glaciers collapse into Messier, and the vast southern ice field breathes in blue. Across the ocean, fjordland in New Zealand glows with constant rain. Shafts of light pierce storm clouds in Milford, mists envelop Doubtful, and islands scatter like puzzles across the sea. Northward, Alaska holds frozen passages. Tracy Arm, where icebergs drift like sleeping beasts. Kenai, where orcas carve black water. And beyond place, beyond map, lies the midnight sun, rivers of light that refuse to set, and hidden waterfalls plunging 1,000 meters straight into the ocean. How can such wonders exist, yet remain unseen? And what forces continue to shape them in silence? This is more than a journey of landscapes. It is a 3-hour passage through corridors of water and stone, where the history of ice meets the stories of people, where legends cling to cliffs, and where the risks of a warming world threaten to erase timeless wonders. You will see the thunder of falling ice, hear the silence of rain on still fjord water, and learn the survival of life on the edge of cold seas. The unseen will become a memory. The hidden will become yours. Welcome to Aysen Fjords. Steep cliffs rise around Geirangerfjord, like the walls of an ancient stronghold. Their sheer faces dropping straight into water dark as obsidian. Morning mist drifts across the surface, shrouding the fjord in a veil that parts slowly with the rising sun. From the decks of small ferries and the windows of hillside farms, the eye is drawn always upward, to where snow still lingers on mountain shoulders, even in summer. Here, the contrast of green valley, white peak, and silver water creates a harmony so precise, it feels composed, as though nature were conducting a symphony in stone and ice. This fjord, listed by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, was sculpted by glaciers that carved their way inland during the last ice age. The forces of ice and meltwater hollowed deep troughs, leaving behind this narrow corridor where the sea now intrudes into the land. The fjord stretches for about 15 kilometers, winding like a great scar through the Norwegian landscape. Each bend reveals new perspectives: steep meadows where goats graze, abandoned farmhouses perched in impossible places, and waterfalls that descend with unbroken force. Among them, the most famous are the Seven Sisters, a cascade of 7 thin ribbons plunging in parallel from heights of over 250 meters. Across from them lies the Suter, a lone waterfall whose stream seems to reach across the fjord, as if yearning toward the sisters, but never arriving. The Seven Sisters are not just a spectacle of water and gravity. They are also bound to local legend. Stories tell of 7 sisters who rejected all suitors, choosing to remain free and unattached, their bridal veils transformed into streams of falling water. The Suter, on the opposite wall, is said to represent a persistent admirer, forever pouring himself out in longing. Such tales entwine geology with imagination, ensuring that each visitor not only sees but feels the place. One cannot watch the waterfalls without sensing both the timelessness of erosion and the fleeting drama of human yearning. At the fjord's heart lies the village of Geirangerfjord, a settlement hemmed in by mountains and reached by serpentine roads that cling to the cliffs. Tourism has made this tiny port a seasonal hub, where cruise ships anchor and buses climb toward viewpoints like Ørnesvingen, the Eagle's Bend, offering sweeping panoramas of water framed by high cliffs. Yet even amid this influx, there is still silence to be found. A short hike into the surrounding forest leads to streams trickling under moss-draped branches, the sound softened by the depth of the valley. The presence of UNESCO recognition here is not only an accolade, but also a responsibility to balance the allure of mass tourism with the preservation of fragile alpine ecosystems. The fjord is not immune to risk. Rising sea temperatures affect marine life, while heavy traffic from ships brings concerns about emissions and water pollution. Landslides remain an ever-present danger, as steep slopes are unstable under heavy rain and shifting frost. Scientists warn of the possibility of a major rockfall into the fjord, which could unleash waves large enough to endanger villages and vessels. These threats remind us that the beauty of Geiranger is never separate from its fragility. The same forces that shaped it, ice, water, gravity, still act upon it today. Yet danger and beauty are intertwined here, creating a sense of awe that is both reverent and uneasy. To stand at Fjords, a cliffside overlook, is to gaze into a corridor of water bracketed by mountains, knowing that time itself carved this passage. The Seven Sisters, constant yet ever-changing with the seasons, fall like luminous threads into the fjord below, and with every drop that strikes the surface, one feels the continuity of past, present, and future flowing through this carved valley. What hidden stories lie beyond the next bend of the fjord, where mist thickens and the walls grow higher? As the fjord narrows, light bends in curious ways, filtered through veils of mist and reflected on the dark surface below. Boats slip silently along this corridor of stone, their wakes spreading in ripples that seem fragile compared to the immensity of the cliffs. At dawn, the water takes on the pale hues of the sky, lavender, silver, and faint rose, while in the late afternoon the walls glow with the last fire of the sun. Each shift in light remakes the fjord, turning it from tranquil sanctuary to theater of shadows. Visitors often remark that Geirangerfjord feels alive, as if its moods shift like those of a breathing being. Tracing its origin, geologists describe how glaciers once advanced with crushing weight, grinding rock into powder and carving these valleys thousands of meters deep. When the ice retreated, seawater flooded in, leaving behind this drowned landscape. The result is not just scenery, but evidence of time measured in ages, not years. The fjord is a textbook in erosion, a living classroom where one can read the record of ice, water, and stone. It is little wonder UNESCO chose it, for the site reveals not only grandeur, but also the slow patience of natural forces. Each curve of the fjord tells of advancing ice, each sheer wall a memory of collapse and retreat. Amid this grandeur, life clings wherever it can. Eagles circle above, scanning both cliffs and water for prey. Salmon run through these channels, their journeys linking ocean to river in a cycle as old as the fjord itself. On the steepest slopes, goats graze fields so narrow it seems impossible for them to balance. In spring, wildflowers brighten the meadows, while birch and pine cling to the slopes, sending roots into cracks in the rock. Humans too have found precarious footholds, tiny farms perched on ledges, where hay once had to be lowered by ropes to reach the animals below. Many of these farms are now deserted, their stories preserved in local memory and in weathered walls that still face the fjord. But this place is more than geology and survival. It is a source of culture and myth. Songs and sagas have long described the fjords as thresholds to other worlds, places where spirits might dwell behind the waterfalls, or giants might stride unseen through the mist. Even today, the play of fog across the Seven Sisters, or the sudden silence of the valley at dusk, sparks a sense of the uncanny. Tourists leave with photographs, but locals carry the fjord in their identity, a reminder that nature is not only backdrop, but participant in human life. Still, beneath its beauty lies uncertainty. Climate change alters snowfall patterns, raising fears for glaciers and rivers that feed the waterfalls. Warmer waters shift ecosystems, threatening salmon and seabirds alike. In an age where so many landscapes face pressure, Geirangerfjord stands as both jewel and warning, a jewel of memory showing what the earth can create, and a warning of how easily such treasures may be unmade. The fjord holds its silence, but the question lingers in the air. Can these carved valleys endure the weight of our century, or will the echoes of the Seven Sisters fade into history? And as the channel widens again, thoughts turn toward the great artery beyond, Sognefjord, the longest, deepest, and most enduring of Norway's sea-carved passages. What secrets lie within a fjord so vast it seems less like a valley and more like an ocean drawn inland? The sea flows far inland here, as if unwilling to surrender to the mountains. Sognefjord, the king of fjords, stretches nearly 200 kilometers into the heart of Norway, making it both the longest and deepest of them all. At its widest, it feels like an inland sea, yet at its narrowest, it folds into steep corridors where cliffs rise straight from the water. At its deepest point, more than a kilometer of dark water lies between the surface and the seabed, a reminder of the glaciers that once gouged this colossal trench. To sail into Sognefjord is to follow the path of ancient ice, tracing a corridor where land and sea blur into one. The fjord was carved during the great glaciations, when ice rivers pressed southward from the Jostedalbreen ice cap, scouring valleys and crushing mountainsides into sheer walls. As the ice retreated, the sea advanced, filling the chasm with salt water. The result is a passage that seems almost endless, bordered by mountains that lean close, then fall away again, revealing new inlets and side fjords. Each turn conceals more than it reveals, and travelers speak of the sensation of being drawn deeper into a labyrinth of water and stone. Unlike Geirangerfjord, intimate and dramatic, Sognefjord is vast, a whole world of landscapes bound together by a single arm of the sea. Life here is marked by contrasts. Tiny villages cling to the edges, their houses painted red or white, standing out against the green slopes and dark cliffs. Farms rise in terraces, where apples and berries flourish in a climate gentler than one might expect at such latitude. The water moderates the air, creating small pockets where fruit orchards thrive just a short distance from glaciers. Boats, ferries, and even kayaks move along the fjord, connecting communities that would otherwise be isolated. The water is highway, frontier, and resource, all at once, shaping the rhythm of daily life. Yet the fjord's immensity is not only natural but cultural. In the side valley of Naeroyfjord, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, medieval farms once dotted the cliffs. Their remains still visible. Along Sognefjord itself, stave churches stand as relics of a wooden architecture unique to Norway, their dark timber and steep roofs echoing the shape of the mountains around them. The most famous Ørnes stave church dates back to the 12th century and is itself a UNESCO treasure. Its carvings a fusion of Viking art and Christian symbolism. To stand before it, with the fjord stretching behind, is to see how humans have always inscribed meaning into landscapes carved by forces far beyond them. The vastness of Sognefjord, however, conceals fragility. Glaciers in the surrounding mountains, including Jostedalsbreen, Europe's largest, are retreating year by year, altering the flow of rivers and threatening ecosystems downstream. Warmer seas bring new species, while stressing old ones, shifting the balance of life in these deep waters. Tourism, though vital to the economy, poses its own risks, as cruise ships discharge emissions into the still air of the fjord. The very qualities that make Sognefjord extraordinary, its depth, its silence, its remote majesty, are vulnerable in a warming and crowded world. Still, the fjord endures, and in its endurance lies a lesson. To sail its waters at dusk is to see mountains mirrored in perfect reflection, their forms doubled, as if sky and earth were joined. In the hush of evening, when only the call of a seabird breaks the quiet, one senses the scale of time that shaped this passage. And yet the question lingers: if this is the longest and deepest fjord, what lies hidden within its more secret branches, where narrow arms twist away from the main channel and disappear into shadows? Those hidden branches of Sognefjord reach like fingers into the mountains, each one a world of its own. Fjord carries the color of glaciers, its waters milky turquoise with the silt of melting ice. Villages here sit beneath slopes where avalanches once thundered, and the Glacier Museum at Fjærland tells the story of ice shaping life, warning of its rapid retreat. Lysefjord, another arm, winds into valleys where waterfalls plunge in threads of silver, their spray nourishing orchards that blossom in spring despite the surrounding walls of rock. These side fjords remind us that Sognefjord is not a single corridor, but an entire network, a realm of water spreading deep into the land. The fjord's immensity makes every arrival dramatic. Ships appear small against cliffs that dwarf them, yet they glide smoothly, their reflections doubling them in the still surface. Kayakers feel the contrast even more keenly, the sense of being an insect in a canyon of giants. At dawn, the fjord can be so quiet that every paddle stroke echoes. By midday, wind funnels down the valleys, rippling the surface into restless waves. This rhythm of calm and storm is part of the fjord's life, shaped by weather systems rolling in from the North Atlantic. Those who live along its edges have learned to read the sky carefully, to know when the fjord will embrace them in stillness and when it will turn fierce. Above, the mountains guard remnants of ancient ice. Jostedalsbreen, though diminished, still sprawls across high plateaus, sending blue tongues of ice down toward the fjord. Nygårdsbreen Glacier, a popular arm of it, offers a rare chance to walk upon centuries-old ice, hearing the crack and groan beneath one's feet. Rivers flowing from these glaciers feed the waterfalls that keep Sognefjord alive with sound and motion. Without the constant contribution of snow and ice, the fjord would lose its defining voice, the endless conversation of water descending from mountain to sea. The human story here continues to evolve. Ferries link communities once accessible only by arduous climbs or long detours. Bridges span side arms, knitting the landscape together while still respecting the water's dominance. Tourism brings visitors from across the globe, but many come seeking not grandeur alone, but quiet moments of solitude on a mountain trail or the hush of standing at Ernest Church with the fjord stretching silent behind. Such moments reveal why this place has inspired sagas, hymns, and paintings. It embodies both power and peace, a paradox held in stone and water. Yet even as it inspires, Sognefjord faces the press of modernity. Plans for hydroelectric projects and wind farms raise questions of balance. How much of nature can be harnessed before its essence is lost? Scientists warn that rising seas and heavier storms may destabilize the fragile slopes, increasing the risk of landslides into the deep fjord. The people who call these shores home must weigh tradition against change, preservation against development. And so, standing at the water's edge, gazing down the endless corridor of Sognefjord, one cannot help but feel drawn onward. Where does this waterway lead, and what lies beyond the next bend? The answer comes in stone and silence. Naeroyfjord, the narrow arm where cliffs close in so tightly that they seem ready to seal the passage altogether. What secrets dwell in a fjord so confined that it feels more like a chasm than a waterway? Naeroyfjord is a passage so narrow that the mountains seem to lean inward, as if conspiring to close the way. At its tightest, the fjord measures barely 250 meters across, yet cliffs rise more than a kilometer straight up from the water, creating the sensation of traveling through a chasm rather than a waterway. Boats that venture here appear toy-like against the vertical walls, dwarfed by the scale of stone. When mist drapes itself across the summits, the fjord becomes a dim-lit corridor, a realm of shadow and reflection. The silence is broken only by the slap of waves against rock, or the echo of a bird's call reverberating between the cliffs. Formed like its siblings by the inexorable weight of glaciers, Naeroyfjord tells the story of compression. Ice carved a valley so steep and confined that when the sea flooded it, no room was left for wide shores or sweeping meadows. Instead, the waterway became a crack in the land, a channel whose drama lies in its starkness. Each sheer wall bears the scars of collapse and retreat, with striations marking the centuries of grinding ice. To glide through its depths is to pass through a cross-section of geological memory, where every line in the rock recalls an age of pressure and release. Despite its confinement, life endures here. Along tiny shelves where slopes allow, small hamlets once took root. The village of Gudvangen, at the fjord's head, was an old Viking settlement, its name meaning, the field of the gods. Traders once sailed from these waters, carrying goods inland and across seas, turning this narrow corridor into a gateway of culture, as well as nature. Wooden farmhouses perched on improbable ledges still speak of resilience, their weathered beams overlooking fields that must have been wrestled from the steepest ground. Today, only a few remain occupied year-round, but their presence adds a human voice to the fjord's immense silence. Animals, too, claim the vertical world. White-tailed eagles patrol the heights, their wings catching thermals that rise from the dark water below. Seals sometimes surface in the fjord, their sleek heads briefly breaking the reflection of mountains. On shaded slopes, moss and birch cling to cracks in the stone, softening the stark walls with fragile patches of green. In spring, waterfalls pour directly from melting snowfields, descending in silver streaks that seem to vanish into mist before they touch the fjord. Their roar fills the narrow space, multiplying in echoes until it feels as if the entire valley trembles. Yet this beauty is edged with danger. The very steepness that makes Naeroyfjord extraordinary also makes it unstable. Rockfalls and avalanches threaten the tiny farms and roads that cling to its margins. Winter snow can load the slopes until they release in thunderous slides, carving new scars down to the water. Modern tourism adds another layer of risk, as increasing numbers of ships venture into the confined channel, their wakes eroding fragile shores and their engines releasing fumes that linger in the still air. UNESCO's protection of Naeroyfjord as part of the West Norwegian fjords recognizes both its unmatched drama and its vulnerability. To drift into the heart of this fjord is to feel both awe and humility. The scale is so overwhelming, the water so deep, that one senses the measure of human presence shrinking to insignificance. And yet the legacy of Vikings, farmers and storytellers insists that this place belongs also to culture, not just to stone. As twilight falls and the cliffs turn dark, the question remains, what stories still lie hidden in this narrow passage, and how have generations survived in a world where land is scarce and the walls of stone never relent? As the boat advances deeper into Naeroyfjord, the feeling of confinement sharpens. Each bend reveals another wall of stone, sheer and unbroken, pressing so close it seems to squeeze the sky. The water lies dark and still, reflecting the cliffs with such precision that horizon and depth become indistinguishable. On some mornings, low clouds descend into the corridor, transforming the fjord into a twilight tunnel, where even sound feels muted. To journey here is to surrender scale, to enter a place that humbles both eye and spirit. Legends have long clung to this narrow waterway. In Viking times, sagas spoke of spirits dwelling in the heights, guardians of the passage. Farmers told stories of trolls hidden in the rock, revealed only when lightning split the sky. The very name Naeroy links to Njord, the Norse god of the sea, underscoring how deeply this fjord was woven into myth. Even today, visitors stepping off ferries at Gudvangen find replicas of Viking villages, reminders that culture here has always been inseparable from water. The narrowness that made sailing treacherous also made it defensible, a place where ships could gather under watchful cliffs before venturing into open seas. Nature, however, writes its own stories. In spring and summer, waterfalls descend in countless strands from ledges far above. Some fall as thin veils, swaying in the wind before scattering into mist. Others crash in torrents that strike the fjord with thunderous force. One of the most striking is Kjellfossen, among the tallest in Norway, its cascades tumbling more than 800 meters down the cliff face. Seen from the deck of a boat, it appears as though the mountain itself is bleeding water, an endless release from ice fields hidden in the clouds. Each season remakes the fjord, with snowmelt feeding the falls in spring, and winter sealing many in silence behind frozen curtains. Communities endure at the margins, adapting to this severe landscape. Small ferries link Gudvangen to other settlements, bringing goods and visitors into a valley that would otherwise feel cut off from the world. Tourism sustains much of the modern economy, yet residents remain conscious of the need for balance. The fjord cannot bear unlimited traffic. Its walls trap air and magnify every disturbance. Environmental regulations now limit the number of cruise ships, aiming to preserve the clarity of the water and the quiet of the corridor. The challenge is ongoing: how to share the fjord's beauty without overwhelming the very qualities that make it sacred. Even in its stillness, danger never lies far. Scientists monitor the steepest slopes for signs of movement, knowing that a rockfall could trigger waves racing down the confined channel. In a space so narrow, the destructive force of displaced water would magnify, threatening villages and vessels alike. Such risks are reminders that the fjord is not passive scenery, but an active, shifting system. One still shaped by gravity and weather. Its walls may seem eternal, but they are always in negotiation with the forces of collapse. And so Naeroyfjord closes around those who travel within it, at once fortress and passage, a place where myth, history, and geology converge. The boat emerges at last into broader waters, and the sense of release is palpable. Yet the mind lingers on that narrow chasm, that corridor of silence and stone. Ahead lies Trollfjord, famed for its impossible entrance and its dramatic mountains. But what does it mean to sail into a fjord so tight that even the sea seems to hesitate before entering? Trollfjord does not reveal itself easily. Hidden within the jagged chain of Norway's Lofoten Islands, its entrance is scarcely more than a slit in the cliffs, barely 100 meters wide, so narrow that ships must approach with caution, their prows aligned precisely with the shadowed gap. Beyond this threshold, however, the passage opens into a hidden basin, a small fjord only a few kilometers long, ringed by mountains that rise like sudden guardians from the water. It feels less like a valley and more like a chamber, a secret space that the sea has stolen from the land. To cross its threshold is to pass from the exposed North Atlantic into an enclosed world, silent save for the cries of seabirds wheeling high above. Geologists explain Trollfjord as a classic glacial carving, a trench gouged by ice that once surged through Lofoten's mountains, deepening the bedrock and shearing walls into sheer verticals. When the ice retreated, the sea invaded, leaving this tiny amphitheater of water surrounded by granite peaks. Unlike Sognefjord or Naeroyfjord, with their vast lengths, Trollfjord is short, intense, and dramatic, a compressed vision of what glaciers could achieve on a smaller scale. Its tight entrance is a reminder of how ice cut deeply here, but left the outer walls intact, creating an illusion of secrecy, as if the fjord were deliberately hidden behind stone curtains. Despite its modest size, Trollfjord has played an outsized role in human memory. In 1890, it was the stage for the Battle of Trollfjord, when small-scale fishermen clashed with steam trawlers over access to cod-rich waters. Accounts describe sails crowding the narrow entrance, oars churning in the spray, and men wielding boat hooks as weapons. The battle became a symbol of resistance against industrial fishing, a moment when traditional livelihoods confronted mechanization. Even today, the story is retold in Lofoten, binding the fjord not only to nature, but to the fierce defense of community. The name Trollfjord itself, invoking the mythic beings of Norse legend, echoes this sense of a place both magical and contested. The cliffs enclosing the fjord rise almost vertically, their granite faces streaked with snow well into summer. Waterfalls tumble down in slender threads, sometimes blown sideways by sudden gusts of wind. Eagles nest in the heights, circling on invisible thermals, while seabirds cluster on ledges barely wide enough to hold them. Beneath the surface, cod and herring move through the dark waters, feeding both wildlife and people. The fjord, though small, is a pocket of abundance, sustained by the mixing of cold Arctic currents with the nutrients carried by rivers flowing down from the mountains. Yet Trollfjord is not without peril. The narrow mouth makes navigation treacherous, especially when storms sweep in from the Norwegian Sea. Winds funnel through the gap, amplifying waves that crash against rock walls only meters from passing vessels. Modern cruise ships sometimes attempt the entry, but captains know that misjudgment could be disastrous in a space with so little room for error. The fjord's very allure, its secrecy, its closeness, also makes it unforgiving. Still, those who enter speak of its atmosphere as unlike any other. To float in the heart of Trollfjord is to feel encircled by stone, embraced yet also watched by towering walls that seem alive with presence. Perhaps that is why legend insists trolls once roamed here, turned to stone at sunrise, their forms now locked in the peaks that guard the basin. In the hushed twilight, with cliffs casting long shadows over the water, It is easy to believe such tales. But this is only the beginning. For within Trollfjord, the drama intensifies when storms collide with silence, when history echoes against cliffs, and when the past of fishermen and trolls still lingers over the present. What happens when the hidden basin meets the restless power of the northern seas? Inside Trollfjord, the walls seem to lean closer, as though the mountains themselves are listening. The water is calm when the winds rest, but every sound is amplified. A paddle dipping, a gull's cry, even the creak of timber from a passing boat. At night, under the pale glow of the midnight sun, the fjord turns otherworldly. Light glances off the granite cliffs in gold and silver hues, and the narrow basin becomes a mirror where sky and sea trade places. Few places on Earth compress such intensity into so small a space. The fjord is scarcely 3 kilometers long, yet it feels infinite in its presence. Stories of Trollfjord always merge nature and myth. Fishermen once claimed to see shapes moving in the fog, shadows that seemed larger than men, echoes of the trolls for which the fjord is named. These legends were not just superstition, they were a way of expressing awe before a landscape that seemed animated by forces beyond human scale. Even now, standing on the deck of a boat surrounded by cliffs rising almost 1,100 meters, one feels observed by stone. The peaks above are jagged, broken and scarred, as though frozen in the act of motion, frozen in a story that refuses to end. The legacy of the Battle of Trollfjord lingers too. Paintings, ballads, and even novels recount the struggle between traditional rowboats and the encroaching trawlers. For Norwegians, it became more than an event. It was a parable about survival and resistance in a harsh environment. Each spring, when cod return to these waters, the memory resurfaces. Today's fishing is regulated, yet the echoes of that clash remind us that even in a setting shaped by glaciers, human choices carve their own deep marks. Nature, meanwhile, offers both generosity and warning. White-tailed eagles still wheel above the fjord, their calls echoing against the cliffs. Schools of herring flicker beneath the surface, feeding a food chain that reaches from seabirds to whales in the outer waters. But storms can close the entrance with frightening speed. In winter, the mountainsides funnel avalanches into the fjord, carrying snow and stone down to the shoreline in sudden roars. Scientists monitor these slopes, aware that a major collapse could send waves racing across the enclosed basin. The same stone walls that make Trollfjord enchanting also make it precarious. Visitors often describe a feeling of being caught between two worlds: the stillness of the sheltered basin and the fury of the sea just outside its gate. It is a paradox that defines the fjord's character. Entering Trollfjord is like stepping into a story, one part carved by glaciers, one part written by sailors and legends, and one part still unfolding with every storm and season. And so the ship emerges once more through the narrow throat, leaving the hidden basin behind. Ahead lies Lysefjord, longer, broader, yet marked by its own drama, a sheer cliff known as Preikestolen, or Pulpit Rock, where visitors stand on the edge of a 600-meter drop. What draws people to lean over such abysses? And what do they see when land, sea, and sky converge at that impossible brink? Lysefjord takes its name from the pale granite that lines its walls, the Fjord of Light. Yet the first impression upon entering is not brightness but depth. Stretching some 40 kilometers inland from the coast of Rogaland, it lies carved into solid rock, its sides so sheer that they plunge nearly 600 meters into the water with little room for shoreline. The fjord is narrower than its length suggests, a corridor hemmed in by cliffs that reflect light differently through the day. Gold at dawn, blue steel by midday, and rose at sunset. To travel here is to follow a path sculpted by ice yet polished by time, where the sea runs deep between walls that seem both immovable and alive. The story of its creation is written in granite. During the last ice age, glaciers advanced across southern Norway, grinding and scouring the bedrock. The pressure of ice weighing thousands of meters thick carved steep valleys that, once the glaciers retreated, filled with seawater. Lysefjord remains one of the purest examples of this process. A trench cut straight into hard stone, leaving vertical walls where fractures still mark the ice's passage. Unlike the green meadows that soften other fjords, here the rock dominates, stark and imposing, a geological record standing in full view. Rising above this fjord is Preikestolen, Pulpit Rock, one of Norway's most iconic landmarks. A flat-topped slab of granite, it projects outward like an altar above the abyss, its surface wide enough to hold hundreds of people at once. Standing there means looking down 600 meters to the still water below, a dizzying view that blends exhilaration with fear. Visitors describe the sensation as standing between earth and sky, suspended over a vast emptiness where wind rushes upward from the fjord. Preikestolen was formed by frost and fracture, where blocks of granite detached and tumbled away, leaving the sharp-edged platform we see today. It is nature's balcony, a stage where one becomes both audience and actor in the theater of the fjord. Life clings where it can. Pines grow in cracks high on the cliffs, their roots finding sustenance in seemingly barren stone. Along the water's edge, tiny settlements appear where slopes allow, some dating back centuries to times when the fjord was both road and larder. Ferries cross its waters, linking communities otherwise isolated by mountains. For hikers, the surrounding plateaus offer trails that lead not only to Preikestolen but also to Kenai, another granite giant, where a boulder is wedged between two cliffs, daring the brave to step onto it with the abyss yawning below. These features have made Lysefjord a pilgrimage site for adventurers seeking both beauty and vertigo. But such allure carries risk. The cliffs are unstable in places, prone to rockfalls, triggered by weather and freeze-thaw cycles. Preikestolen, though iconic, has no guardrails. Safety lies in caution alone. Every year, rescue teams respond to accidents and missteps, reminders that all must be balanced with respect. Tourism has grown so rapidly that questions arise about sustainability. Trails wear thin under millions of feet, ferries multiply across the waters, and the quiet of the fjord is often broken by the buzz of drones. The very landscapes that inspire reverence must also bear the burden of human desire to witness them. Still, Lysefjord endures, its stone walls reflecting centuries of storms and sun without surrender. To drift in a boat beneath Preikestolen is to look upward and see human silhouettes against the sky, tiny figures clinging to the edge of granite. The scene unites past and present, glacial power that carved the fjord, human daring that seeks its heights. And yet, beyond the pulpit and the famous trails, the fjord holds more secrets, remote valleys, hidden waterfalls, and stories of survival along its stark shores. What lies in those quieter corners, where the world's gaze seldom reaches, but where the fjord's essence is most deeply felt? Beyond the gaze of Preikestolen, Lysefjord reveals a quieter face. Along its length, waterfalls stream from the high plateaus, pouring in white ribbons that vanish into the dark water below. Some are visible only after rain, appearing suddenly out of mist as if the mountain itself were weeping. In winter, they freeze into columns of ice that shimmer blue against the granite, silent monuments to the cold. The cliffs echo each sound, a raven's cry, the distant hum of an engine, magnifying the sense that this is a natural amphitheater, a place where stone and water amplify the smallest presence. The inner fjord narrows, bordered by steep slopes where scattered farms once clung to terraces. Isolated families lived here for centuries, tending goats and gathering hay in places accessible only by rope ladders. Today, many of those farms stand abandoned, their weathered buildings silent witnesses to lives spent balanced between survival and emptiness. Modern visitors glimpse them from ferries, marveling at the stubbornness of past generations who carved a living from cliffs that now feel almost uninhabitable. The ruins, perched high above the water, embody the human desire to belong even in landscapes that resist settlement. Kenai rises at the fjord's end, a massive granite wall that towers more than 1,000 meters above the sea. It is here that the famous Kenai Bolton lies wedged between two cliffs, suspended like a stone caught mid-fall. For those who dare step onto it, the view is both terrifying and transcendent. An abyss on either side, the fjord below reflecting the sky. Base jumpers leap from these cliffs, vanishing into the air before opening parachutes, transforming the fjord into a stage of extreme courage. But the cliffs also attract climbers, hikers, and those who seek simply to stand in silence, absorbing the immensity of stone rising against the sky. The risks here are real. Weather shifts quickly, storms funnel down the fjord without warning, shrouding the granite in rain and fog. Rockfalls are common, reminders that the same forces that created Preikestolen and Kenai are still active, reshaping the walls piece by piece. Climate change intensifies these risks, with warmer winters destabilizing frozen rock and altering snowmelt that feeds the fjord's rivers. What feels eternal is in fact in constant transformation, fragile in ways not immediately visible to the eye. Yet amid danger, Lysefjord offers renewal. Hikers return with stories not only of thrill, but of clarity. Moments when the world seems distilled into stone, water, and sky. The fjord strips away distraction, leaving only the essentials of endurance and wonder. As ferries glide back toward the coast, the cliffs recede, yet the memory remains vivid. Granite pulpit, hanging boulder, waterfalls that vanish into mist. The journey through Lysefjord lingers as both warning and blessing, a reminder of how thin the line is between awe and peril. And beyond Lysefjord, the waters shift course toward the far south of the Americas, where Patagonia hides a labyrinth of fjords less known, but no less profound. What might be discovered in Aysen, where channels twist through remote wilderness, and silence reigns even deeper than here? At the far edge of South America, where the Andes fracture into islands and channels, lies the Fjordo Aysen. Here Patagonia dissolves into a labyrinth of water, a maze of fjords and inlets shaped by glaciers retreating into the Pacific. The Aysen Fjord cuts deep into Chile's southern coast, reaching inland through mist and mountains draped in evergreen forests. Its waters are cold and heavy with silt from rivers, carrying the memory of ice, turning the surface a shifting green-gray. To enter this fjord is to step into one of the least populated corners of the continent, where human presence is sparse and silence is thick with rain. Geologically, Aysen bears the unmistakable signature of glaciation. During the last ice age, immense ice fields pressed westward, carving troughs through the Andes, leaving steep walls where the sea now surges inland. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions have also played their part, reshaping the fjord's margins. Chile's coast lies along the Pacific Ring of Fire, and Aysen sits within a zone of tectonic unrest. Tremors and landslides are not unknown. The result is a fjord less polished than those of Norway, wilder in its contours, as though the land is still negotiating with the sea. The visual impression is one of endless corridors shrouded in mist. Rainfall here is among the heaviest in the Americas, feeding dense temperate rainforests that descend directly to the water's edge. Trees grow thick with moss, their branches bending under the weight of moisture. Waterfalls appear without warning, dropping from cliffs in white ribbons before vanishing into clouds that hover low over the fjord. At times the rain lifts, and snow-tipped peaks reveal themselves above the clouds, their summits jagged and remote. More often, the fjord remains cloaked in grey, a world where atmosphere dominates, where visibility narrows to what lies a few hundred meters ahead. Life along Aysen is sparse but resilient. The town of Puerto Aysen lies inland at the fjord's head, linked to the ocean by a channel that narrows before widening again into the greater sea. Fishing and aquaculture sustain much of the population. Salmon farms dot sheltered coves, their nets floating like dark rings on the water. For generations, small boats have plied these channels, harvesting shellfish, navigating tides, and surviving in a climate that is both generous in resources and harsh in isolation. Roads are few, and many communities still rely on boats as their only link to the outside world. The fjord, as in Norway, is both highway and barrier. Yet this isolation has preserved much of its character. Where other fjords ring with the horns of cruise ships, Aysen resonates with quieter sounds, the rush of rain, the cry of cormorants, the low rumble of distant thunder. Dolphins sometimes surface in its waters, and sea lions haul onto rocky ledges. In the forests, pudas, the world's smallest deer, move cautiously among the ferns, while condors glide over ridges, their wingspans rivaling the breadth of small boats below. This coexistence of ocean and forest makes Aysen less a corridor than a crossroads of ecosystems. Still, dangers are never far. In 2007, a major earthquake struck the region, triggering landslides that collapsed into the fjord and unleashed destructive waves. Scientists warn that the steep slopes remain unstable, vulnerable to similar events. Climate change adds further pressure. Glaciers feeding the rivers retreat, altering currents and increasing sediment. Salmon farming, while economically vital, raises concerns about ecological impact. Diseases and chemicals leaking into the wild, threatening the delicate balance of marine life. In Aysen, the tension between use and preservation is constant, written into every ripple of the water. As the rain thickens once more and the fjord bends deeper inland, one senses that this is only the beginning of Patagonia's watery labyrinth. Beyond Aysen lie even vaster channels, where glaciers descend directly into the sea and icebergs drift among storm-born waves. What mysteries wait in the immense Fjord Messier, a waterway so large that it feels less like a fjord and more like an inland sea. Fjord Aysen narrows as it winds inland, the slopes closing in until the mountains seem to lean over the water. Here the sense of isolation deepens. Villages fade into scattered homesteads, and the channels become corridors of solitude. In this quiet, the forest dominates. Southern beech trees, draped in lichen, form green walls that press down to the shore, their roots drinking from the same waters that carry salmon farms and fishing boats. Rain falls almost daily, each drop feeding countless streams that rush down the cliffs, creating temporary waterfalls that vanish as suddenly as they appear. The landscape is never still. It shifts with every cloudburst, every tremor of the earth, every tide that pulses through the channel. The people who live here carry stories of endurance. Colonization of Aysen came late, in the 20th century, when settlers cut paths into the forest, burned clearings, and struggled to link valleys with primitive roads. Even today, much of the region remains without easy access. To travel from one village to another may require hours of sailing, or precarious drives along gravel tracks, vulnerable to landslides. The fjord both connects and isolates. Its waters serve as highway, but also as reminder that communities are scattered, strung like beads on a thread of coastline. Life is shaped by resilience, by the knowledge that survival depends on respect for the land and sea. Wildlife thrives in the remoteness. Dolphins surf the wakes of ferries, their fins flashing in the grey water. Sea lions gather at rocky islands, barking into the mist. Inland, the forest shelters endangered species. Huemul deer, shy and rare, wander the valleys, while condors wheel overhead, their wings catching the strong updrafts from granite walls. The biodiversity here owes much to the combination of temperate rainforest and marine abundance, two worlds meeting in the fjord's embrace. For scientists, Aysen is a living laboratory, offering a window into ecosystems that elsewhere have been diminished by human expansion. But danger lingers in memory. In 2007, the region endured a magnitude 6.2 earthquake that triggered massive landslides into the fjord, generating waves up to 6 meters high that damaged boats and claimed lives. Such events remind residents that the earth beneath them is restless, shaped by the meeting of tectonic plates. The scars of those landslides remain visible, slopes stripped bare, debris fields reaching into the water. Climate change adds further uncertainty. Melting glaciers feed rivers with greater volatility, raising the risk of floods, while the warming sea challenges both traditional fisheries and the salmon farms that now dominate the local economy. Each shift in the environment adds pressure to a fragile balance. Yet for those who venture here, the overwhelming impression is of immensity and quiet. To sail through Aysen at dusk is to move through a palette of grey and green, with mist settling low over the water, and the faint glow of distant windows flickering along the shore. The fjord feels less like a destination than a threshold, leading deeper into Patagonia's secret world of channels and ice. As night falls, the horizon opens, suggesting that beyond this narrow valley lies something larger, wilder, more immense. And indeed, beyond Aysen stretches Fjord Messier, broader, deeper, more remote. Here the scale of Patagonia reveals itself fully, in waters surrounded by glaciers that carve into the sea, filling the channels with drifting ice. What happens when the fjord is no longer corridor but ocean? When glaciers themselves tumble directly into the waves? Fjord Messier is less a valley than an inland sea. Stretching for nearly 200 kilometers, it is the longest fjord in Chile, a corridor so vast that its waters appear oceanic, bound not by gentle shores but by walls of rock and ice. Here the Andes crumble into channels that fracture endlessly southward, a maze of waterways where mountains rise like islands from the sea. To sail through Messier is to enter the immensity of Patagonia at its fullest scale, an environment where human presence all but vanishes and the horizon seems forever shifting behind curtains of mist. Formed by the retreat of colossal glaciers, Messier was carved into the heart of the Cordillera as ice fields advanced and receded across millennia. The trough left behind was so deep that when seawater rushed in, the fjord became both passage and basin. In some places, the water plunges more than a kilometer below the surface, rivaling the depths of Norway's longest fjords. Along its margins, glaciers still descend from the southern Patagonian icefield, their faces breaking into the water with thunderous cracks that scatter icebergs across the channel. These drifting fragments turn the fjord into a shifting mosaic of blue and white, reminders that the landscape is alive, still sculpted by ice. The visual impression is overwhelming. At one turn, cliffs soar directly from the sea, their flanks streaked by waterfalls. At the next, the fjord broadens until it feels like open ocean, a horizon stretching wide beneath gray skies. Storms sweep in from the Pacific with little warning, churning the waters into chaos and veiling the mountains in rain. On calmer days, reflections settle so perfectly that sky and sea blur, leaving vessels adrift in a mirrored world. Each shift in weather remakes the fjord entirely, serene in 1 hour, furious in the next. For sailors, it is both marvel and menace, a waterway that demands respect. Few live along these shores. Settlements are scarce, accessible only by sea. Their isolation measured not in kilometers, but in days of difficult navigation. Shipwrecks are common in the region's history. The most famous is the wreck of the steamship Capitan Leonidas, now stranded on a shoal in Messier's waters. Once a cargo vessel, it now serves as an improvised lighthouse and landmark, a rusted sentinel in the vast channel. Its presence underscores the challenge of navigating these waters, where shifting weather, hidden rocks, and drifting ice create hazards at every turn. The fjord is alive with wildlife. Whales migrate through its depths, surfacing in plumes of spray that rise like exhalations from the sea itself. Dolphins race along the bows of passing ships, while seabirds circle endlessly overhead, their cries carried on the wind. The surrounding forests harbor guanacos and pumas, though sightings are rare. More often, the signs of their presence are glimpsed in tracks and shadows. For scientists, Messier is a frontier, one of the least studied yet most ecologically vital fjords of the southern hemisphere, where marine and terrestrial systems overlap in fragile balance. But with grandeur comes danger. Storms batter the channel, winds funnel through mountains reaching gale force in minutes. Icebergs from tidewater glaciers drift silently, lurking hazards for vessels navigating the gray expanse. The isolation means that aid is distant, and mariners know that every voyage here is undertaken at their own risk. Climate change is adding new uncertainty. Glaciers retreat more quickly, carving larger volumes of ice, while warming seas alter the ecosystems that sustain fisheries and seabirds. Messier is thus both stage and warning, a place that magnifies the drama of Patagonia while exposing its vulnerability. And yet, despite all its risks, Messier draws those who seek immensity. To cross it at dawn, with light seeping through breaks in the clouds, is to feel the presence of something elemental: ice, water, wind, and stone converging in a single vast corridor. Still, the fjord holds more secrets. Beyond the drifting icebergs, deeper inland lie glaciers that collapse directly into the sea, sending echoes that roll for miles. What does it mean to witness the raw moment when a wall of ice breaks away from the continent itself and the fjord trembles with the sound of its fall? Deeper into Messier, the fjord grows stranger still. Its length seems endless, bending and widening until perspective is lost. Mountains fade into mist, their slopes fractured by glaciers that descend like frozen rivers, pushing tongues of blue ice toward the sea. Some meet the water directly, their fronts cracked and towering, ready to carve. When a mass of ice finally collapses, it falls with the force of a cathedral crumbling, striking the fjord in a roar that echoes for minutes. Waves radiate outward, rocking vessels miles away, while new icebergs drift free, sculpted into fantastical shapes by wind and tide. These moments are both spectacle and warning, reminders of the power still at work in Patagonia's heart. The southern Patagonian ice field, from which many of these glaciers spill, is the largest body of ice in the southern hemisphere outside Antarctica. Its reach extends across peaks and valleys, a frozen plateau feeding countless fjords with fresh water and ice. In Messier, its presence is constant, even when unseen. The milky green of the fjord's surface comes from glacial flour, finely ground rock carried by meltwater. Each drop of color tells of mountains eroding under the weight of ice, a slow dismantling that has been ongoing for millennia. Yet today, this rhythm accelerates. Scientists record retreating fronts year by year, their loss reshaping the balance of currents, fisheries, and ecosystems that depend on them. Human presence remains minimal. A few fishing boats trace the waters, harvesting shellfish and crab from the depths. Scientists occasionally establish temporary camps to study the glaciers and marine life. But there are no towns, no permanent harbors along most of Messier's vast length. The fjord resists habitation, its storms and remoteness, overwhelming even modern infrastructure. Navigation remains perilous. Charts warn of hidden shoals and sudden shallows, while shifting icebergs create hazards that technology cannot always predict. The wreck of the Capitan Leonidas stands as a symbol of this challenge, a skeletal reminder of how unforgiving these waters can be. Wildlife fills the emptiness with movement. Humpback whales breach in summer, rising from the depths in arcs of spray before vanishing beneath the surface again. Sea lions gather on rocky spits, their barking carrying across the fjord. Albatrosses wheel overhead, riding winds that sweep in unbroken from the Pacific. The scale of the landscape mirrors the scale of its creatures, each adapted to the immensity of water and distance. For a visitor, the silence is broken only by these calls, by the crash of ice, and by the ceaseless rhythm of waves. Messier embodies Patagonia's extremes: vastness, solitude, and fragility. It is a place where climate, geology, and life are bound in precarious balance. The same forces that carved this fjord continue to shape it, and those who travel here sense the ongoing conversation between ice and ocean. The fjord is unfinished, its story still unfolding with each calving glacier and each storm that sculpts its waters. Sailing out of Messier, one carries not only the memory of its enormity, but the sense of transition. The fjord is not an ending, but a threshold, leading southward toward landscapes even wilder, where the southern Patagonian icefield collapses in torrents of ice directly into channels without name. What lies ahead in that frozen frontier, where an entire field of ice pours into the sea, creating a labyrinth of glaciers and fjords, more remote than any yet seen? At the southern edge of the Andes, where mountains splinter into islands and storms roll endlessly from the Pacific, lies the southern Patagonian icefield. Campo de Hielo Sur. Spanning more than 13,000 square kilometers, it is the largest expanse of ice in the world outside Antarctica and Greenland. A frozen plateau whose white surface seems to stretch without end. From its heart descend dozens of glaciers, each carving a path between peaks, each pouring into fjords that lead the eye from mountain heights to the gray expanse of the sea. To approach by boat is to see cliffs of ice rising straight from the water, blue walls fractured with crevasses, glowing as if lit from within. This ice field is a relic of the last ice age. Once, vast glaciers covered nearly all of Patagonia, their weight grinding valleys and carving basins that the ocean later filled. What remains in Campo de Hielo Sur is both remnant and warning, a frozen kingdom still holding sway, but diminishing as the climate warms. Every glacier here bears scars of retreat, lines of barren rock marking the edges where ice once lay, meltwater rivers surging stronger each year, and icebergs carving with increasing frequency into the fjords. Scientists describe the region as one of Earth's most dynamic ice systems, a place where change can be measured in days rather than centuries. The spectacle is immense. Glaciers like Piolievent, Gray, and O'Higgins descend for tens of kilometers, their surfaces torn by ridges and crevasses. Where they meet the fjords, they fracture into towering fronts, hundreds of meters tall. shedding icebergs that crash into the sea with a sound like thunder rolling through stone corridors. These fragments drift away, sculpted by wind and tide into arches, spires, and translucent blocks that glow turquoise beneath the Patagonian light. Around them, the water is a pale, milky green, thick with glacial flour, the silt ground from mountains by the slow pressure of ice. Life persists along these icy margins. Kelp forests sway beneath the fjords, feeding sea urchins, fish, and sea lions. Penguins gather on rocky outcrops, diving through the frigid waters in search of anchovies. Inland, the forest clings where it can, southern beech and lenga trees finding foothold in valleys, sheltered from the wind. High above, condors patrol the skies, their broad wings tracing circles over cliffs and ice. Human presence is rare but determined. Scattered fishing communities, scientific bases, and adventurers who cross the ice with skis and ropes, facing storms that can erase visibility in moments. For them, the ice is not only landscape but trial, a measure of endurance. The risks are as vast as the beauty. Calving glaciers can send shockwaves across fjords, capsizing small boats in their sudden fury. Weather changes with violent speed. The same waters that lie still in the morning may churn with gales by afternoon. Crevasses hide beneath snowfields, swallowing the unwary. Above all, climate change threatens the ice itself. Every year, satellites record its retreat, entire tongues collapsing into fjords, entire valleys left bare. The southern Patagonian icefield is shrinking, its power undiminished, yet its reach in decline, a reminder that even landscapes that feel eternal are vulnerable. And yet, standing at the edge of a fjord, with cliffs of ice before you, the sense is not of loss alone, but of awe. The ice breathes with cracks and groans. The fjord echoes with waves striking stone, and the wind carries the taste of salt and snow. This is a place where Earth's forces speak in their rawest form. But if the outer glaciers are dramatic, the deeper secrets lie within the ice field itself, in hidden plateaus and storm-racked passes where few have ventured. What does it mean to step onto the frozen heart of Patagonia and to cross a world where silence is broken only by the wind's endless howl? To step onto the southern Patagonian icefield is to enter a world without horizon. The surface stretches white and endless, broken only by jagged peaks that pierce through like islands in a frozen ocean. The scale is disorienting. Distance vanishes in the glare of light reflected from ice, and silence reigns except for the hiss of wind and the occasional groan of a glacier shifting beneath. Here, storms arrive suddenly, burying landmarks in snow, leaving travelers guided only by compass and instinct. Expeditions crossing this plateau describe it as both sublime and punishing, an environment where beauty is matched by severity, where survival depends on precision and respect. Glaciers radiate outward from this central mass, descending like frozen rivers toward the sea. Among the most dramatic is P-11, the largest glacier in the southern hemisphere, outside Antarctica. Unlike many of its retreating neighbors, P-11 has advanced in recent decades, its towering front pushing into the fjord, bulldozing forests and expanding its reach. This anomaly puzzles scientists, a reminder that ice responds not only to climate, but to complex local conditions. Elsewhere, however, retreat dominates. O'Higgins and Uppsala glaciers have shrunk dramatically, their calving fronts collapsing into vast lagoons filled with drifting icebergs. Each loss redraws the map, opening new lakes, reshaping fjords, rewriting the landscape with startling speed. Human encounters here remain sparse, but they leave stories etched in the region's identity. Explorers of the 20th century braved weeks of isolation to map the ice, describing it as a frozen desert where time seemed suspended. Today, mountaineers and skiers trace their paths, roped together as they traverse crevasses and wind-blasted ridges. In some valleys, indigenous Kaweskar and Tehuelche once traveled, moving between coast and steppe, their presence fleeting but profound. Modern settlements lie far away. Those who come now do so by choice, compelled by curiosity or science, aware that the ice allows no margin for complacency. Yet even here, far from roads and towns, global change leaves its mark. The southern Patagonian icefield is shrinking faster than almost any comparable system on Earth, its melt contributing significantly to rising seas. Each retreating glacier exposes raw stone that has not seen daylight for thousands of years. With the loss comes a chain reaction. Reduced freshwater flow alters fjord ecosystems, fisheries shift, forests adapt to new conditions, and human communities downstream face uncertain futures. What appears as stillness from above is in truth rapid transformation. Still, the power of the place remains undeniable. To witness a glacier calving into a fjord is to see geology unfold in real time, to hear continents reshaped by forces older than humanity. The echoes of icefalls roll for minutes, reverberating between stone walls, while waves surge outward, carrying fragments of a vanished age. The Campo de Hielo Sur is not simply scenery, it is a stage where Earth's deep processes play out in full view, demanding humility from those who watch. As the journey leaves Patagonia's ice fields behind, the scene shifts across oceans to another land of fjords. New Zealand's Fiordland, a realm of rain and granite, where mountains plunge directly into the sea and mists paint the air with light. What mysteries linger in Milford Sound, where near-constant storms weave curtains of water and shafts of sun pierce the clouds like sacred rays. Milford Sound is a place where rain is not interruption, but essence. Tucked deep within New Zealand's Fiordland National Park, it is one of the wettest inhabited places on Earth, receiving over 6 meters of rainfall each year. That constant deluge defines the landscape. Waterfalls pour from every crease in the cliffs, hundreds at once when storms sweep in, each cascading in silver threads down walls of granite more than a kilometer high. Between these vertical guardians lies a corridor of water that stretches inland for 16 kilometers, a fjord carved by glaciers, yet animated now by storm and light. Geologically, Milford was shaped in the same way as its northern cousins in Norway and Chile. During the last ice age, glaciers advanced from the mountains, gouging valleys with relentless force, leaving behind sheer walls and a deep trench that the sea later filled. Today, the fjord's depth and steepness testify to that glacial might. Its floor plunges far below the waterline, while its cliffs rise abruptly to summits like Mitre Peak, which towers 1,692 meters above the sea. Few other places on Earth display so vividly the scale of glacial carving, where sea and mountain stand face to face without transition. The visual centerpiece is Mitre Peak itself, named by European explorers for its resemblance to a bishop's headdress. Its pyramid form rises almost directly from the water, a solitary mountain reflected in the fjord's dark surface. In the mist and rain, its outline softens, appearing and vanishing as clouds pass. Around it, waterfalls such as Stirling and Bowen Falls plunge continuously into the fjord, fed by the endless cycle of rain. On clear days, rare and fleeting, the entire panorama sharpens, cliffs etched against blue sky, glaciers gleaming on distant ridges, the water a mirror of impossible stillness. Yet most often Milford belongs to storms, and its beauty is revealed through curtains of rain, pierced by sudden rays of light. Life thrives in the margins of this watery corridor. The fjord's unique layering of salt water from the sea and fresh water from rainfall creates a darkened surface that mimics the deep ocean. As a result, species normally found hundreds of meters below rise close to the surface. Black coral, deep water fish, and rare invertebrates. Dolphins patrol the channels, seals haul out on rocky shores, and on rare occasions, even whales pass through. Above, the rainforests cling to the steep slopes, dominated by beech and podocarp trees, their trunks wrapped in moss and ferns, nourished by near-constant moisture. The sound is not silent. It resonates with the dripping of leaves, the call of birds, the crash of falls. For the Maori, Milford Sound Piopiotahi was sacred, a place of legends tied to demigods and journeys across the sea. It was also a corridor of passage, though never an easy one. The surrounding mountains made access by land extremely difficult. European explorers, arriving centuries later, faced similar challenges. Until the early 20th century, Milford was reachable only by arduous tracks across Fiordland's ridges or by perilous sea voyages along the wild west coast. Even now, though highways and tunnels bring visitors, the fjord retains its aura of remoteness, its sense of being a world apart. The risks of Milford are as defining as its beauty. Heavy rainfall frequently triggers landslides, sending torrents of rock and mud crashing into valleys, and sometimes across roads. The same storms that sustain waterfalls can close access, stranding travelers in isolation. In the fjord itself, sudden squalls whip the water into chaos, while cliffs reflect waves back and forth, magnifying their force. For wildlife and humans alike, survival here has always meant adaptation to extremes. And yet, for those who enter Milford Sound, the impression is of a place both overwhelming and intimate. Rain softens the granite, mist hides and reveals peaks. Waterfalls appear like fleeting curtains of light. It is a landscape in constant motion, sculpted as much by weather as by geology. To drift on its waters is to feel suspended between ocean and storm, between ancient ice and present rain. Still, Milford's story does not end with spectacle. Beyond the rain-soaked cliffs lies a deeper question. How does such relentless water shape not only rock and forest, but the lives and myths of those who inhabit its shadow? Rain continues to fall in Milford Sound, but it is within that deluge that its character deepens. Each storm brings transformation. Dozens of new waterfalls appear overnight, streaming from ledges and ridgelines, some falling more than 1,000 meters in a single drop. For hours they roar into the fjord, only to vanish when the skies clear, leaving the cliffs bare again. This cycle of appearance and disappearance is part of Milford's rhythm, an eternal dialogue between sky and stone, between cloudburst and calm. The layering of fresh water atop seawater gives the fjord an unusual ecology. The top few meters form a tannin-stained lens, darkened by runoff from the rainforest. Beneath it, the sea remains cold and saline. This double layer blocks sunlight, creating deep-sea conditions close to the surface. Black corals, normally found at depths of hundreds of meters, grow here in relative shallows, forming underwater forests that harbor fish and invertebrates rarely seen elsewhere. Scientists describe Milford as a natural laboratory, where species usually hidden in the abyss live within reach of divers. It is a reminder that the fjord's richness extends beyond its cliffs, into unseen depths shaped by the same rains that cascade down its walls. Above the water, the rainforest clings improbably to slopes nearly vertical. Mosses and ferns grip the granite, while beech trees extend roots into cracks filled only with moisture and humus. Landslides are frequent, stripping the cliffs and sending green avalanches into the fjord, only for new growth to return within years. The forest here is never static. It collapses, regenerates, and climbs again, mirroring the cycles of rain that sustain it. In this, Milford embodies resilience, life adapting endlessly to instability. Human connection remains equally shaped by challenge. For the Maori, Piopiotahi was tied to the legend of the Piopio bird, said to have flown here in mourning after the death of the demigod Maui. Its cry gave the fjord its name. Later, European settlers attempted to anchor communities, but isolation and weather kept Milford from ever becoming a permanent town. Instead, it grew as a place of passage, first for explorers tracing its waters, later for travelers seeking its beauty. The Homer Tunnel, blasted through solid rock in the 1930s, remains the most direct road access, itself a symbol of determination to reach a land where mountains block every approach. Tourism today transforms Milford into one of New Zealand's most visited natural wonders, yet it is still vulnerable to its own extremes. Storms can close roads,